A thug tried to snatch the royal guard's rifle, thinking he could intimidate the unshakable soldier. But the moment a shot rang out, he froze in place, and what followed left the crowd stunned. Here's the full story. But before we continue, let us know in the comments below where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel as tomorrow, at the same time, we bring you another remarkable display of royal guard valor that you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace as Marcus Thorne emerged from the crowd, his presence as disruptive as a stone thrown into still water. Tourists instinctively stepped aside, parents drawing their children closer as he shouldered his way through the gathering, his heavily tattooed arms and scarred knuckles telling stories of violence that had nothing to do with service or honour. His steel-toed boots scraped against the courtyard stones with deliberate aggression, each step a challenge to the peace and dignity of the surroundings. A faded prison tattoo peeked above his collar, evidence of time served, though clearly not lessons learned. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed upon the royal guard standing at attention nearby, seeing not the embodiment of centuries of tradition, but what he perceived as an easy target. The guard stood perfectly still, his scarlet tunic a splash of noble colour against the palace's grey stones. Polished brass buttons caught the dying sunlight, each one reflecting the meticulous care that went into maintaining the uniform's pristine appearance. His bearskin cap sat at the precise regulation angle, and his ceremonial rifle was positioned exactly as generations of guards before him had held it. Two elderly women, catching sight of Thorne's approach, hastily moved away from their photographing spot. A father gently guided his fascinated son backward, recognizing the telltale signs of brewing trouble. The usual excited chatter of tourists dimmed to worried murmurs as Thorne's intentions became clear to the gathering crowd. "Well, well," Thorne's voice carried the rough edge of someone who'd spent more time shouting in prison yards than engaging in civil conversation. "What do we have here?" His lips curled into a sneer as he surveyed the guard's immaculate appearance. The contrast between them could not have been starker. Discipline facing disorder, honour confronting contempt. A pair of veterans, their own medals visible on their blazers, had been explaining the guard's role to their grandchildren. They fell silent now, their experienced eyes tracking Thorne's movements with the wariness of men who recognised genuine threat when they saw it. The older of the two touched his campaign medals unconsciously, a habit formed in moments of anticipated conflict. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward with unwavering discipline, but there was something in his bearing, a subtle tension, visible only to those who knew what to look for, that spoke of readiness. This wasn't just ceremonial duty, this was a trained soldier reading the signs of imminent confrontation. "Look at this," Thorne announced to the rapidly thinning crowd around him, his voice carrying the cruel amusement of someone about to demonstrate their power over what they perceived as weakness. "Standing there like some toy soldier. Bet you think you're something special, don't you?" The air seemed to thicken with tension as Thorne began to circle the guard, his movements reminiscent of a predator sizing up its prey. "You think that uniform makes you tough?" Thorne's voice carried across the courtyard, drawing unwanted attention from the remaining tourists. He moved closer to the guard, deliberately invading the space that respect and tradition had always kept sacred, all dressed up like some Christmas decoration. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, his posture perfect, but there was a new tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. The brass buttons of his tunic caught the fading sunlight, each one reflecting years of service that Thorne was about to mock. "Look at this get-up," Thorne continued, his voice dripping with contempt as he gestured at the guard's uniform. "Red coat like some circus performer, funny hat that probably weighs more than your backbone." He circled closer, his steel-toed boots scraping against the stones with deliberate menace. Bet you feel real special standing here all day, pretending to be important." The two veterans had moved closer, their faces set in grim lines. The older one's hand remained on his medals, not in pride now, but in growing anger. His companion's jaw worked silently, years of military discipline keeping him from intervening, at least for the moment. "You know what I think?" Thorn raised his voice, playing to the uncomfortable audience that couldn't look away. "I think this whole thing is just a show, a tourist trap." He stepped even closer, his breath visible in the cooling air. "Bet that rifle isn't even real. Probably some plastic toy they give you to make you feel like a real soldier." A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking in a whisper why the bad man was being so mean. The mother quietly hushed him, drawing him back toward the safety of the crowd. But Thorn caught the exchange and smiled coldly. "Yeah, kid, take a good look," he called out. "This is what your tax money pays for. Some bloke in a costume pretending to be a soldier." He turned back to the guard, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "But we know the truth, don't we? Under all this fancy dress, you're nothing. Just a puppet on strings playing your part in this little show." The guard's discipline held firm, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance, but those who looked closely might have noticed his knuckles whitening slightly on the ceremonial rifle. 8 years of active service, including tours in combat zones, had taught him to read threats, and Thorn was rapidly moving beyond mere provocation. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" Thorn taunted, moving to stand directly in front of the guard. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just not allowed to speak without permission from your puppet masters?" His scarred hand reached out, fingers hovering inches from the guard's chest. "Let's see what happens if we pull your strings." The older veteran took a half step forward, but his companion caught his arm. Both men had seen enough combat to recognize that this situation was balanced on a knife's edge. The guard's stillness wasn't weakness. It was the controlled patience of a trained soldier assessing a threat. "You stand here day after day," Thorn continued, his voice taking on an edge of genuine anger now, as if the guard's composed silence was a personal insult, "looking down on people like me, thinking your fancy uniform makes you better than us." He spat on the ground near the guard's polished boots. "But I know men like you. Take away the costume and what's left? Nothing but another man who bleeds like everyone else." The evening air had grown colder, but it wasn't the temperature that made several onlookers shiver. There was something in Thorn's bearing now, a coiled tension that spoke of imminent violence. His fingers flexed at his sides, scarred knuckles whitening as his mockery began to transform into something more dangerous. "Tell you what," he said, taking another step closer, "why don't we find out what's real under all this pageantry?" His hand moved toward the guard's chest, where polished medals caught the dying light. "Let's see what happens when we pull back the curtain on this little performance." Thorn's hand reached out, fingers grasping the first medal on the guard's chest. "Nice collection of tin you've got here," he sneered, deliberately rattling the military decorations. "What did you do to earn these? Stand really still for a really long time?" The medals, each one representing acts of valor in combat zones across the world, clinked together under Thorn's rough handling. Campaign medals earned in Afghanistan's harsh terrain, commendations for bravery under fire, tokens of sacrifice that had been paid for in blood and sweat, all now subject to the disrespect of a man who couldn't comprehend their true weight. "Look at this one," Thorn continued, flicking a particular medal with his scarred finger. "Probably bought it at a costume shop, didn't you?" His other hand reached up to grasp the collar of the scarlet tunic, the pristine fabric crumpling under his grip. "All of this, just dress up, playing soldier while real men do real work." The guard's eyes remained forward, his posture unwavering, but there was a dangerous stillness in his bearing now, It wasn't the stillness of ceremony, but the contained readiness of a predator, the kind of stillness that combat veterans would recognize as preceding swift and decisive action. "What's this uniform made of, anyway?" Thorne's fingers moved to the fabric, deliberately wrinkling the meticulously pressed tunic. "Feels cheap to me, like everything else about this act." He tugged at the material, a sound of threading, stretching, reaching the ears of horrified onlookers. The veterans watched with increasing tension, their own military experience telling them this was quickly moving beyond mere disrespect. The older one's hand had moved from his medals to his side, where years ago a service weapon would have rested. His companion's face had hardened into the expression of a man calculating odds and angles, old habits from battlefield days rising to the surface. "Even these buttons," Thorne continued, running his hand roughly across the brass fixtures, smearing their mirror-like shine with his fingerprints. "All for show, just like you." His voice had taken on a darker edge, the mockery becoming more physical with each passing moment. "Standing here like some statue while I mess up your pretty costume. Can't do anything about it, can you?" The guard's ceremonial rifle hadn't moved, but its presence seemed more significant now. The weapon, while maintaining its traditional position, somehow carried a new weight in the tension-filled air. Those who knew their military history might have remembered that these guards were all combat-trained soldiers, and their rifles, while ceremonial, were far from props. "Maybe we should see what's under this fancy hat." Thorne's hand moved upward, reaching for the bearskin cap. "Bet it's not even real fur. Probably some cheap—" The guard's stance shifted ever so slightly. A movement so subtle that only the veterans noticed it. But it was enough to make Thorne pause, his hand hovering inches from the bearskin. For a fraction of a second, something primal in him recognized the warning signs that his conscious mind was too arrogant to process. But the moment passed, and his sneer returned. "What's wrong, toy soldier? Worried I'll mess up your costume?" His hand dropped to the rifle's barrel, fingers trailing along the metal with deliberate provocation. "Wonder what would happen if someone decided to take your little prop away. Bet that would ruin the whole show, wouldn't it?" His fingers wrapped around the rifle's barrel, the metal cold against his scarred hand. "Let's find out just how real any of this is," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Time to show everyone what happens when you pull back the curtain on this little charade." Everything happened in an instant. Thorne's fingers tightened around the rifle's barrel, his muscles tensing for a sudden yank. "Time to expose this whole—" The guard moved with the fluid precision of a cobra strike. Years of combat training transformed ceremonial stance into lethal efficiency in a heartbeat. The rifle, far from being the prop Thorne had mockingly assumed, became a weapon in the hands of its master. With a swift, controlled motion, the guard pivoted the rifle's butt end upward, catching Thorne squarely in the solar plexus. The crack of wood against flesh echoed across the courtyard like a thunderclap, followed by Thorne's startled gasp as the air rushed from his lungs. He staggered backward, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by the dawning realization that he had severely miscalculated. His boots scraped against the courtyard stones as he struggled to maintain his balance, one hand clutching his midsection where the rifle's impact had left its message. You can't," Thorne wheezed, trying to reclaim his tough guy persona even as he fought for breath. "That's assault!" But the words carried no weight now, not after his own actions had been witnessed by dozens of onlookers. The guard had already resumed his ceremonial stance, the rifle back in its proper position, his movements so precise it almost seemed like he had never moved at all. But there was something different in his bearing now, a lethal readiness visible to anyone who knew what to look for. The two veterans exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the controlled power of a trained soldier who had issued a clear warning. Thorn straightened slowly, his face flushing red with a dangerous mixture of humiliation and rage. His prison-hardened ego couldn't accept the fact that his attempt to demonstrate power had backfired so spectacularly. The guard's swift response had not only caused him physical pain, but had shattered his illusion of superiority. "Think you're tough, do you?" Thorn's voice was raspy, but the threat in it had doubled. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckle tattoos stretching across whitened skin. "That was a lucky shot. Let's see how you handle a real fight." The guard remained motionless, but his stillness now carried a different quality, not the rigidity of ceremony, but the readiness of a warrior. His eyes, still fixed forward, seemed to hold the cold calculation of someone who had faced far worse threats in real combat zones. "I'm going to take that rifle," Thorn announced, his voice carrying the desperate edge of a man whose pride demanded violence, "and show everyone here what a joke you really are." He shifted his weight, preparing to lunge. His prison yard experience had taught him the value of surprise, but he failed to recognize he was no longer dealing with an ordinary opponent. Several tourists backed away quickly, sensing the impending violence. A mother hurried her children behind a stone pillar, while others reached for their phones, not to record but to call for help. The veterans stood their ground, their own combat experience telling them this situation was about to escalate significantly. Thorn's muscles tensed as he prepared to spring forward. Time to end this little game of... The guard's bearing shifted almost imperceptibly, but the change was profound. Gone was any pretense of ceremonial duty. This was now a combat-trained soldier responding to a clear threat. The rifle, while maintaining its formal position, was now held with the subtle readiness that spoke of years of battlefield experience. A wise man would have recognized the warning signs. A smart man would have backed down. But Thorn, driven by wounded pride and a lifetime of solving problems with violence, was neither wise nor smart in that moment. His body coiled like a spring, preparing for what he thought would be a triumphant demonstration of his superiority over this toy soldier. What he failed to understand as he gathered himself for another attack was that he had crossed a line that separated ceremonial practice from deadly serious reality. The guard's next response would drive that lesson home in a way that no one present would ever forget. Thorn launched himself forward with the desperate speed of a man with nothing to lose, his boots scraping against the courtyard stones as he charged. Prison yard instincts guided his movements, fast, aggressive, committed to overwhelming his target through sheer brutality. But before he could complete his second step, the sound of gunfire cracked across the palace grounds. The guard had moved with practiced efficiency, the ceremonial rifle rising to firing position in one fluid motion. The warning shot split the evening air like thunder, echoing off the palace walls with authority that no amount of ceremony could match. The smell of gunpowder cut through the cool air, sharp and real and utterly serious. Thorn froze mid-stride, his body locked in position like a statue, a cruel irony given his earlier mockery. His face, previously contorted with rage, now displayed something entirely different. Pure, primal fear. The realization that the rifle was very real, very functional, and in the hands of someone who knew exactly how to use it, hit him like a physical blow. "Don't move!" The guard's voice carried the steel of combat command, each word precise and laden with deadly promise. His rifle remained trained with unwavering steadiness, the barrel now seeming to Thorn like the entrance to a very dark future. Thorn's hands rose slowly into the air, his fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from the sudden, terrifying understanding of just how badly he had misjudged the situation. The tough prison facade cracked completely, revealing the coward that often lurks beneath such aggressive exteriors. I didn't," he stammered, all pretense of toughness evaporating like morning mist. The man who had been so eager to demonstrate his power now looked pathetically small against the backdrop of Buckingham Palace. The guard's bearing had transformed completely. Gone was any trace of ceremonial duty. This was a combat veteran responding to a threat with practiced precision. His stance spoke of years of battlefield experience, each subtle movement calibrated for maximum efficiency. "On your knees," the guard commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that bypasses conscious thought and triggers immediate compliance. It was the voice of someone who had issued similar commands in situations where lives hung in the balance. Thorn dropped to his knees so quickly that the impact rattled his teeth. His palms remained raised, fingers spread wide, desperate to show submission. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air, running down to sting his eyes. The two veterans watched with grim satisfaction, recognizing in the guard's response the kind of disciplined force they had known in their own service days. This wasn't theatrical display. This was the real face of military training, revealed only when circumstances demanded. "The rifle you were so eager to test," the guard's voice carried across the now silent courtyard, "has been used in active combat zones, just like the man holding it." The subtle shift in his stance spoke volumes to those who understood such things. "This uniform you mocked, it's been worn in places where respect isn't a choice. It's the difference between life and death." The evening air seemed to vibrate with tension as approaching sirens announced the arrival of authorities, but no one moved. No one spoke. The tableau held, the guard standing rigid and ready, Thorn kneeling in trembling submission, and the crowd watching in stunned silence as reality stripped away all pretense. Armed police officers swarmed into the courtyard, their movements precise and coordinated. They took in the scene with professional efficiency, the kneeling suspect, the guard's combat stance, the stunned crowd. No words needed to be exchanged. The situation spoke for itself. "Armed police, stay down!" The lead officer's command was almost redundant. Thorn hadn't moved a muscle since the warning shot had shattered his world of assumptions. As they approached with handcuffs ready, his shoulders slumped in final defeat. The guard lowered his rifle with military precision, resuming his ceremonial stance, as if the entire incident had been nothing more than a momentary interruption of duty. But the crowd had seen, behind the curtain of ceremony, had witnessed the steel beneath the tradition. As the officers secured Thorn's wrists behind his back, one of them addressed the guard with professional courtesy, tinged with respect. "We'll need a statement, sir. This is a serious offence, attempting to disarm a member of the Queen's Guard." The older veteran stepped forward, his campaign medals catching the last rays of sunlight. "I saw everything, officer. Deliberate provocation, physical contact with the guard, attempt to seize a military weapon. The guard showed remarkable restraint." His companion nodded gravely. "Could have been much worse. In my day, anyone trying to grab a guard's rifle would have gotten more than just a warning shot." Thorn, now thoroughly subdued, was helped to his feet. The swagger was gone, the tough guy persona shattered. His eyes couldn't meet anyone's gaze as the officers began to lead him away. Each step seemed to carry the weight of his humiliation. "You never know, do you?" one tourist whispered to another, all this time thinking they were just there for show. The guard had already resumed his post, his posture perfect, eyes forward, ceremonial duty restored. But there was something different now in how the crowd regarded him. The tourists who had been taking casual photos earlier now stood at a respectful distance, their expressions thoughtful. A young boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, is that why they say never to touch the guards?" The father nodded solemnly. "They're real soldiers, son. Everything about them is real. The uniform, the rifle, the training. What we see is just the surface of their duty." As Thorn disappeared into a waiting police vehicle, the older veteran approached the guard's position. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Instead, he drew himself to attention, and offered a crisp salute. Soldier to soldier, warrior to warrior. The gesture spoke volumes about mutual understanding and respect. The guard stood motionless once more, the scarlet tunic pristine, the bearskin cap perfectly aligned, the rifle held in ceremonial position. But no one would mistake this for mere ceremony again. In an age where tradition often faces mockery and ceremony is dismissed as mere performance, the day's events served as a stark reminder. The Queen's Guard stand as living embodiments of values that run deeper than their ceremonial duties suggest: honour, discipline, and the readiness to act when those values are threatened. For those who wondered why these guards maintain their stoic presence day after day, the answer had been demonstrated with crystal clarity. They stand not just as guardians of a palace, but as defenders of principles that have weathered centuries of challenges. Their ceremonial duty masks a core of steel. Their practiced discipline contains capabilities that few would wish to test. The next time you visit Buckingham Palace and see these guards standing their watch, remember this: behind every pristine uniform beats the heart of a warrior. Each polished button, each precise movement, each moment of ceremonial stillness represents years of training and dedication. Their silence isn't weakness. It's the quiet strength of men who know exactly what they're capable of and choose to serve with dignity rather than display. What would you do if faced with such blatant disrespect? How far should tradition bend before steel must show through? Perhaps the real question isn't why these guards stand so still, but rather what it takes to make them move, and whether anyone would truly want to find out. The guard's stance remained perfect as darkness settled over London, his duty unchanged by the day's events. After all, that's what real strength looks like, not in the ability to provoke a response, but in the discipline to stand ready, watching, waiting, protecting values that will outlast any who dare to challenge them. If you found this story inspiring or thought-provoking, don't forget to show your support. Hit the like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share it with your friends who love stories about unshakable resolve, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories just like this one. And remember to press the bell icon so you're the first to know when a new video drops. Before you go, be sure to check out the other videos appearing on your screen now. You won't want to miss them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.